First of all, I want to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank our colleagues and my colleagues in the Assembly and in the Senate. I want to thank law enforcement that are here and also the prosecutors. You're going to hear from them shortly. We're here today to talk about bail reform. And some say we talk about bail reform quite a bit. And I think that's good that we do. It's important. And it's particularly important to do that today for two reasons, really. One reason, public safety. We'll talk about it every day, every minute of every day, because public safety, and what more important thing can we do in state government than protect New Yorkers and keep our streets safe? The second reason we want to talk about it, and it's particularly apt because this is budget week here in Albany. And as all you know, trying to get some change to the bail laws most likely will only happen if we get it in the budget. So I think doing this today is particularly timely, and we want to work with anybody who's willing to work with us to try to get this change and get some change in the budget. So with that, we have great law enforcement here. We're going to speak louder than them. First off, we have Richard Wells. He's the president of the Police Conference of New York. Let's come on up, Chief Wells. You here? Okay. He's been tied up. I apologize, but it's good we gave him a big round of applause. Next, we have Sheriff Kevin Melverhill. He's the first vice president of New York State Sheriff's Association from Franklin County. Sheriff?
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Melverhill, Franklin County Sheriff and vice president of New York State Sheriff's Association. I want everybody to know how important this is to us as sheriffs and law enforcement officers. This morning when I left the house, it was 10 above zero. It was 4 or 5 inches of snow on the ground. It was blowing snow. And I'm here because it's important. It's important to all of us. The sheriffs once again stand before you with our colleagues in law enforcement to call upon the legislature and the governor to make needed changes to our criminal procedure law when it comes to bail and bail reform. Sheriffs have been stalwart in their opinion on this matter. The original bail reform initiative, while well-intentioned, was a drastic overcorrection, and for the past several years, we've been dealing with the fallout. It is past time that New York joins nearly every other state in the nation, as well as the federal judiciary, in allowing judges to consider defendants' risk to public safety when considering bail or remand. Sheriffs believe this simple change will alleviate many of the problems we're seeing today. We urge our representatives to take action and fix the system before the session draws to close. It's important. It's important to us. It's important to our constituents. It's important to everybody in this state. Please, please take action. Thank you.
So it's great to hear from the men and women in blue and their opinions on this and their strong support of changing this law. We also have with us a couple of prosecutors who have been on the front line having to deal with this law. And one of those prosecutors is a former colleague of mine in the Assembly, the Washington County DA, Tony Jordan.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here today. The transformative changes that we saw in the 2019 budget really changed so dramatically the landscape of criminal justice in New York. We're not here today advocating for a complete change to those laws, but we all have to acknowledge that there are problems with the laws and they need to be fixed. They need to be fixed now. The problems continue, they persist, they can't wait. That is why we're here today to ask that the Assembly, Senate, and Governor consider these changes in an open conversation in the budget process. The changes to New York bail created an almost insurmountable standard for judges to consider anything other than release. This not only includes the shoplifter, who quite frankly generally weren't being held, but it also applies to violent criminals, criminals that have committed violence that don't constitute violent felony offenses under our laws, repeat offenders, domestic violence perpetrators. Judges were hamstrung, found themselves with little to no choice but to release the persistent offenders back on the street. The debilitating effect on law enforcement and our very communities that we're here to protect when someone who possesses a firearm is almost immediately released back in the streets has been so devastating, not only to the sense of community safety, but also those that are involved in protecting the public. It is possible to structure a balanced approach that protects the rights of the accused with the rights of the public to feel safe in their own communities. And that is what we've been asking for the past 2.5 years for this body to accomplish. And I think it's doable, and I think it should be done now. Discovery, often not as getting as much attention, has created such a challenge in our offices by creating a requirement and a standard that demanded so much in terms of resources that our county simply could not afford and cannot sustain. We are asking the government to properly fund this very important initiative. We can do this and get the discovery to defendants in a timely fashion. No one is asking to go back to a time when defendants received little to no information in certain instances. But when you have a system that penalizes for mere oversights or minor pieces of the pending criminal matter resulting in dismissals of the cases, that hardly seems to be a fair and just system. So what we are asking this body again is to make the necessary amendments, not to undo the very noble mission and objectives of these laws, but to make sure that victims continue to receive the protection they deserve and that we're able to continue protecting the public. So I want to thank my colleague, former colleague, Leader Barclay, the Senate, and all of law enforcement that are here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And sometimes we get accused of being hyper-partisan here in Albany, and sometimes there might be a little truth to that claim. But I tell you, when it comes to bail reform, this knows no party. This is a bipartisan issue that has to be addressed. So with that, I want to introduce the Saratoga District Attorney, Karen Hagan, to say a few words.
Thank you, Leader Barclay. And I echo very much my colleague Tony Jordan's comments as it relates to the changes that occurred when it comes to prosecution each and every day throughout this state. The men and women in my office, the assistant district attorneys, live all of the changes that have occurred as a result of the criminal justice reforms that were passed in 2020. And I'm here to say that we have risen to the occasion to attempt our very best to meet those requirements that were imposed upon us without any support or additional funding or even knowledge of what that impact was going to have on the day-to-day lives of the criminal justice system in New York State. In particular, in addition to the bail and discovery issues that District Attorney Jordan has spoken about, one of the other initiatives that we live with on a daily basis has to do with Raise the Age. And those initiatives were passed just before the criminal justice reforms, but they still continue to have challenges before us each and every day. And in particular, I'd like to focus our attention today on the issues with the victims of crimes of those who are 17 and 16 years of age. They are often forgotten in the system that sends those younger offenders to family court without consideration as it relates to the level of seriousness of those offenses and when they occur. There are some individuals who have committed offenses as youthful offenders as age 16 and 17, whose cases have taken so long in youth part that they have aged out of that system, and therefore those cases have not been able to be resolved. And that, in the end, does a huge disservice to the victims of crime. And aren't we all here today to talk about the criminal justice system because we're seeking justice? We want justice for the victims of crime, we want justice for our communities, and we want justice for the defendants. And that means it's a balancing of all of the factors involved. And there are some things that are just missing from both bail, discovery, and Raise the Age. And it's time now to fix all of that, and I'm confident that the men and women behind me are going to do their very best to make that happen in the next coming weeks. Thank you for listening to me, and I wish you all well.
Thank you, Karen. I think you and Tony hit it just right about, this is really about the victims out there. And so I appreciate your comments. Next, we're going to hear from a number of legislators. First up, we have the ranker on the Assembly Corrections Committee, Joe Giglio. Joe.
Good afternoon. I'm here to tell you that in 2020, we did a study regarding bail reform. We met with the stakeholders, we met with everybody involved, and we brought that study forward. There was also another study done by the Office of Court Administration that was released just before the vote. Both those studies were ignored. They were ignored because majorities can force anything they want through this legislature. They weren't concerned about how it was going to work. They weren't concerned about protecting victims. They were just concerned about getting something through. So here we stand 2 years later with the problems that we identified way back when. And I asked the question, how come we've never seen the Office of Court Administration's report? How come nobody talks about the things that this legislature did behind us and tried to stop this carnage from happening? The chaos going on in the criminal justice system is a tragedy for everybody, including the criminals. This is not the way it's supposed to work, and when you try to throw the baby out with the bathwater, this is what you get. More danger, more chaos, and that's the problem. So we have the DAs and law enforcement standing up here and every other component of the criminal justice system asking the same question. Why did you try to tear down this system? The idea was to have criminal justice evolve. Everybody that we talked to, everybody on this dais and behind me said, yes, we need to change. But the idea was, how do you achieve the change? So we had a method, they ignored it, and this is what you've got today. So my question to them would be, again, all this has gone on for 2 years. Every one of the stakeholders knows what's wrong with the system. Why not sit down with them and find out what's wrong with the system, what's right with the system, and create a system that benefits everybody and keeps everybody safe? Thank you, and God bless. Next up, Senator Anthony Palumbo.
Thank you, Joe. And so at the interest of being a little bit repetitive, it is about balance. And those of you who don't know, I was a prosecutor for many years, handled major cases, rapes, robberies, homicides, and then I was a defense attorney for years. So here's some of our previous speakers discussing and mentioning that it's not that if there were no changes needed, that we never said that. We need changes where you include all stakeholders and everyone involved to do it right. I was in the Assembly when this was coming through the original budget, and I said, a Class C nonviolent felony is manslaughter in the second degree. That's a non-bailable offense. Oh, no, was what we heard on the floor. It was implemented in January, all hell broke loose, and then there were more changes made. And they said, we fixed it, everyone, hooray, everything is great. And now we're standing here again, looking for another change. And this is what's notable. Neither of the two legislatures, majorities, have any interest in making changes to the current state of the law. The governor, after her budget, after her 30-day amendments that were completely silent, leaked out some potential changes, but never included the people standing on these steps right now, law enforcement, prosecutors, people who could strike the appropriate balance so we can do this incrementally and smartly. So none of them exist. None of those conversations exist. And I scribbled down a few just off the top of my head. Even if the governor's proposal were to be adopted, robbery in the second degree, you still can't set bail. Arson, we did a press conference about Billy's Law. An arsonist committed 3 arsons. The day before, committed an arson, was released. The following day, started another fire, and one of the firefighters was sadly lost his life responding to a fire that should have never happened. Riot, not a bailable offense under even the governor's proposal. So the point is this, it needs to be fixed, but it needs to be fixed the right way. I suspect, knowing politics and having been here now for several years, there will be a quote-unquote fix in the budget. It will be heralded as everyone saved the day, New York is safe again, thank goodness they did it. And it'll do nothing, or it will do very, very little. It's not just gun crimes that need to be included. Robbery aided by another. People have seen that on Twitter, on the news. When a gang of people are physically intimidating a woman and her child, with or without a weapon, that's a robbery. Not bailable in New York, and not even under this proposal. So we need to get those involved who've actually been in this business, like myself, like those of us standing around me, who've done this for a living, who understand the nature of criminal conduct. You can't hide behind a bad policy when it comes to criminal justice. That's one thing our friends in the majorities have been able to do. They have a terrible idea, policy comes out, New York is the most expensive state to live in. They can hide behind it and make some tweaks, not when it comes to public safety. So they need to respond. It is imperative that we do it now before more people lose their lives. Thank you. So I'm now going to introduce a former New York City lieutenant, our friend from the Assembly, Assemblyman Michael Riley.
Thank you, Senator Palumbo. Thank you, leaders. Thank you to our law enforcement that are standing here with us. Thank you for the job that you do every day. We have a perception problem in New York. It's on our majority side. The perception problem is that if they do the right thing, they are weak. No, it's if you don't do the right thing and truly look to do the correct changes, then you are weak. It's time for us to stand up, work together, and do something that very rarely is done here. Listen to both sides as we talk about the necessary changes. Listen to the men and women that do the job each and every day. The perception problem is that we've emboldened criminals because of your weak nature on crime. Just recently, there was a video out, a mother, her 3-year-old child walking into a hallway, 2 men waiting in wake with masks on their face. Put a gun to that kid's head, committed that robbery. Why? Because they feel they can get away with it. Not just those crimes. Think about our seniors. Every day they are scammed. Those transcontinental criminals, scam artists, commit a grand larceny against your loved one, an e-felony. But thanks to bail reform, it's a revolving door. And they get to keep siphoning all that money, tens of millions of dollars, from our loved ones. Why? Because we let them do it. And yes, I'm a member of this body, this legislature, and I hold myself accountable. It's time the majority holds themselves accountable. Wake up, New York. It's time for you to tell the majority, get with it, fix this perception, bring back our communities, restore public safety. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to introduce Senator Daphne Jordan.
Good afternoon. A lot of what I'm going to say has been said for over 2 years now, so I hope our colleagues on the other side of the aisle and the governor hears it once and for all. Every day, New Yorkers are forced to deal with the effects of the disastrous bail and discovery reform. As dangerous violent criminals continue to be released without bail, free to commit more violent crimes. Crime rates are skyrocketing, and New Yorkers are much less safe than they were under the old bail laws. We have seen the devastating effect that these changes have had on our citizens. We have an opportunity in this budget to take a stand and strengthen public safety, support our law enforcement officials, and restore common sense in our criminal justice system. Judges' hands are tied, and our justice system has become a revolving door as they're forced to release criminals back onto the streets without having the ability to exercise their discretion to hold an individual based on the danger that they pose to the community, or, in many cases, their history of failing to appear in court. Unless an offense falls within the narrow class of crimes that qualify for bail, judges have no option to set bail, even if doing so is necessary to protect the community or assure the defendant's return to court. Many offenders have a lengthy history of failing to appear in court or have a lengthy history of violence, including retaliatory violence against witnesses or victims, must be immediately released at arraignment simply because the offense that they have committed is not sufficiently dangerous or harmful enough to warrant setting bail. And even when someone is charged with an offense that qualifies for bail, judges are only allowed to consider factors related to the defendant's risk of flight. They cannot consider that the defendant poses to the community danger or that they will be victimized. Offenders arrested for serious crimes such as breaking into and stealing from a business, felony driving while intoxicated, drug dealing, or animal abuse are immediately released at arraignment, free to continue committing crimes. Since the bail reforms became effective in January 2020, crime rates have skyrocketed across the state. From 2019 to 2020, the murder rate increased by almost 50%, and gun crime outside of New York City increased nearly 30%. And we know that some of this crime has been committed by offenders who were released under the current bail laws. 3,460 offenders arrested and released committed violent felonies. That's violent felonies while out pending trial. 3,460 violent crimes could have been prevented if judges had full discretion to set bail in appropriate cases. My colleagues in the Senate and Assembly Republican conferences have led the charge to reverse this dangerous trend of pro-criminal, anti-victim, and anti-law enforcement policies. I'm proud to stand with our DAs and law enforcement officials. We must restore common sense to our criminal justice system. We can't let this opportunity pass us by. We need to strengthen public safety in this year's budget. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce my leader in the Republican Senate Conference, Senator Rob Ortt.
Thank you very much, Senator Jordan, and I want to thank all of my colleagues who spoke very eloquently, very much to the point. I will not belabor it because I can't say it better than those who have spoken before me here today, but I'll just close by saying we've been talking about bail and discovery and criminal justice reform and increasing crime rates for the past almost 3 years. Now, why? Why won't it just go away? Which I can guarantee you is what my colleagues in the majority would love if it just went away, if we just stopped talking about it. We can't stop talking about it because it's not going away, because New Yorkers of all stripes, of all ethnicities, in all communities, they're talking about it. They're worried. Every day there's a new video, a new report, a new victim. And our colleagues in the majority not only have no ideas, they put forward no solutions. We're just trying to scare people, as if murder rates are just a statistic used to scare people. That's a real statistic. That's a real data point. When these folks wearing uniforms go out, their jobs are immeasurably more difficult today because of policies enacted here in this building. It's not a scare tactic. It's not a talking point. And as proof of that, despite all the statistics that have been mentioned, just 2 weeks ago, or a week ago, the governor released her 10-point plan to fix bail. Now, what was it? What was it that suddenly she had an epiphany that this needed to be fixed? Was it she was booed mercilessly by the New York Rangers fans? Was it her poll numbers? I'll tell you what it wasn't. It wasn't the crime rates we've been citing, because those have been going on for years. And that was never enough to get her to say, we need to do something about it. It wasn't until the political numbers came back that was the driving force. And that should tell you everything you need to know about the folks who are supposedly trying to fix this. The reality is, the folks who are standing next to me wearing uniforms and our DAs, they have to stand here at a press conference because they're not welcome in the room to actually make this law better. They weren't welcome 3 years ago, and they're still not welcome. And that should tell you everything you need to know about the people who are trying to fix this law. So the truth is, we're going to keep talking about this, and New Yorkers are going to keep talking about this until it's actually fixed. Now, I'm not holding my breath because my colleagues in the Senate and the Assembly, they've said, we have no interest in fixing it. We have no interest in making the necessary changes. They're not interested in making New York a safer place. They're interested in less victims. So we are here today. We continue to try to advocate for changes, but the truth is, I don't know why I'm going to trust the folks who broke this system, who overturned it. This wasn't reform. This was an attempt at revolution, a political criminal justice revolution. They wanted the system to be overturned. They didn't like the way the system was working. They don't trust law enforcement. They don't trust DAs, and they don't trust judges. And I believe New Yorkers aren't going to trust them when it comes to this issue at all, including much longer later this year. So with that, I want to thank my colleague, Assembly Leader Will Barclay, for having this press conference. I want to thank my colleagues who've been standing up here talking about this issue for years. We're going to keep talking about it. Let's hope they do the right thing in the budget, but regardless of whether they do or not, we will continue to talk about this issue until it gets addressed. Thank you very much. I was just, I guess I'll open it up to questions. I would ask if you have on-topic questions, if they're for me or for Leader Barclay or for any one of the members who spoke, please, direct your question or point out who you want it directed to. And then we'll do on-topic first and then off-topic.
For you, Leader, speaking of the budget, if this doesn't get done in the budget, do you think it has life in the subsequent few weeks left in session? And outside of that, do you feel like there should have been conversations earlier on? The 10-point plan just came out this month. Do you think we should have had that maybe back in January so there was more time to negotiate?
I wish you were in the Senate. It's all good points and questions. So with regard to, I'll do the second part, then I'll go to the first part. Look, the way this was sort of put out there, I think lends a lot of question about the sincerity of the governor and the lieutenant governor around this issue. It was leaked out to a publication, New York Post. Initially, the governor denied, wouldn't defend the plan, wouldn't even take credit for it. And then after the questions didn't stop, they sort of said, yeah, this is our plan. But she could have put it in her budget in January. She didn't. She could have put it in the 30-day amendments. You know, those are the things that you forget. There's a lot of things in the budget. She could have said, I'm going to put it in my 30-day amendment. She didn't. She could have had a big press conference saying, we need to do something about this. She didn't. So I just question the sincerity and the effort from her office. If she can't defend her plan, if she can't articulate why it needs to happen, why would her colleagues in the legislature, who passed bail reform, why would they go along with it, right? So, we'll find out here in a couple days. But yes, I think this would have had a better chance, would have been viewed as a more serious policy proposal had she done it through the budget or in the 30-day amendments. She did not. Once we get on the other side of the budget, I never want to say never, it gets immeasurably more difficult to get something like this done. And that's not even just a partisan statement. I think for those of us that have been here know, the budget is for the governor. She's the one pushing it. Let me be clear, my colleagues in the legislature, they are not, the majorities in the legislature are not the ones who are advocating for changes. This is solely because the governor put this forward. So once the budget's passed, she loses a lot of leverage politically, and I think it'll be even more difficult if she can't get it done in the next, couple hours, couple days. As far as, what was the first?
That was it.
That was it, okay. All right.
Well done.
All right. Josh.
And this is for anyone that want to jump in. I think about half the violent felony rearrests are in cases in which judges have discretion to set bail, and judges set bail about a third of the time, regardless of whether they have discretion or not. Can anyone comment on whether judges should be setting bail more often when they do have that discretion, to what your party or what folks up here would like to see in those instances? I understand the least.
Sure. Yeah. No, I would like to maybe have a DA comment on that, because I think they are probably better positioned to address that if they so choose. I would say that I absolutely think they should be setting bail more. But I think part of what we've seen, and I'll take a broad brush on this real quick, what we've seen with the bail and discovery laws is there's the changes that they made in statute, but there are changes that have, it has affected the way police arrests they make, and it also has changed DAs, how they do their job, as well as judges. It has, I think, caused them to be concerned about, if I set bail, will I be accused of only setting bail? Will I be accused of being a racist? Will I be accused of things that I don't, as a judge, want to do? And so I think the one sort of downside of not having judges involved at the outset, not having DAs, not having police officers, is I think some of those issues we could have heard directly from them. How will this impact you? How will this change the way you might look at your job? How will this change the way you may do your job? And I think that is something we have seen across the board, and I have heard from judges, DAs, and members of law enforcement. But I would absolutely say yes to your question, but I don't know if there's a district attorney or a sheriff that might be able to speak more articulately than I did.
You don't know me, I'll never pass that on to you. I think you answered your question with what you said at the very end as you were trailing off. The way the bail statute works now is there's a very formulaic question first. Can the judge consider? But the most important piece and the most limiting piece is the phrase you started to say, which is the least restrictive means possible to ensure attendance at court. Has nothing to do with the strength of the case, has nothing to do with the record, for the most part, has nothing to do with danger to the community or recidivism. It simply looks at if that person has never missed a day in court, regardless of the violence they've perpetrated, the statute directs the judge to basically release the person, maybe with some reporting. But remember, the available reporting and oversight in the state is grossly limited by resources. New York City, far more resources for alternatives to incarceration. Other parts of the state, maybe a lot less. So I think the key is that least restrictive means piece. It looks solely at return to court, which is not the only concern relative to public safety.
Can I ask while you're up there, Danny, just for DA Jordan and any other law enforcement groups, just to confirm, has the Hochul administration tried to engage you at all during these talks over the past couple of weeks?
So at the beginning of session, yes. With the 10-point plan, that was released a week and a half ago. We remain optimistic that this week we will have meetings. They've been scheduled. We'll see where that goes. So it's critical that we do it now. For anyone who's been around knows the value of the budget process. And so we remain cautiously optimistic, or just I'm a Pollyanna hopeful. So.
Also, for either or any of the DAs, discovery is not something that's a part of the plan from the governor. Is there something specific that you'd like to see, whether it be completely reverting back to the original system, or just a tweak of what we have now to lighten your workload? Or is it funding maybe?
Well, good news is there is a component in her plan that does address budget. That was part of her 10-point plan that addresses some of these concerns. No, we don't want to go back to where we were. The reality is I'm not aware of any DA offices that complied with the old statute. So that ought to suggest we should change it, meaning in terms of timing. So yeah, I think what we have to do is find a way, one, fund it, you put your money where your mouth is, and two, provide some reasonable approach that that our law enforcement partners can spend time not only gathering the evidence in a deliverable method and fashion, but also continue to protect our streets. And that's where we continue to see a challenge. So.
Is the deadline reasonable in your opinion?
It's not appropriate when you consider 20 days after arraignment, when trials are 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 18 months later, not due to anything on our side, but it's the timing of getting it to defense so that they can have appropriate time to review it. But I don't see where 20 days after arraignment or 30 days after arraignment makes sense.
And we've also heard locally that only about 5% of cases go to trial, so it was an exponential increase in workload from your offices. Do those numbers check out in a similar way?
I might suggest astronomical would be the only change, but when you do go from that, and not only is it the number of cases, but it's the timeline, and the cost is law enforcement on the street. At the end of the day, most of our law enforcement agencies consist of a handful of officers, and if they're gathering and producing discovery, they're not out checking on elderly folks. They're not out protecting individuals on the streets, and that's been a huge, huge cost that we see across the state. Thank you.
Nice, good job. Any other on-topic questions? Are there any off-topic questions?
Two questions, Senator. One on the bills. Just wondering what your comments are in terms of the release that the governor put out today about the funding of the Bill Stadium.
Oh.
And then...
I thought you were asking about Von Miller.
And then the second piece is about the former governor, and Rich Party just put out a statement saying that the Siena poll affirms that people are willing to give them a chance. Just your thoughts on that, Art?
It's good to see Rich Party still working. Look, on the Bill Stadium, I have only seen what's been obviously reported in the media, broad strokes. I still would like to sort of hold a little bit of my comments till I've seen bill text, because I think there's some specific details in there that need to be known that aren't known at this point. I'll say two things. One, I'm glad. Look, I've been very open about this. I want the Bills to stay in Buffalo. I want the Bills, therefore, to stay in New York. I think the identity of Western New York and the Buffalo Bills is linked. You cannot divorce the Buffalo Bills. It is not a small thing to think the Bills leave. What's really the downside to the state of New York or to Western New York? It is significant in a host of ways, both economic and otherwise. So I'm glad to see that a deal seems like it's going to get done. There was never going to be a deal that didn't include public dollars. I think everyone knew that. And I think those public dollars do need to be scrutinized and questions need to be asked. And we'll see where this falls in the budget, where it's sort of slotted. But I also think it's important to note that the commitment from the Pegulas, when they bought the Bills several years ago, they bought the Bills to prevent Bon Jovi essentially from moving them to Toronto. That was a real concern. They bought the Bills, and they made a commitment then to keep the Bills in Buffalo. And their commitment, financially and otherwise, I think is an important piece of this deal, both to the community, but also to the state when you look at the deal overall. So, but I still would like to see. I've not seen anything. I would like to. I'm hopeful to have conversations myself with the folks at PSE. Up to this point, all these discussions have been had outside of the public view, right? They've been had between the governor and folks from Pagula Sports and Entertainment. I think it's important that legislative leaders, myself, Leader Barclay, also get a chance to have dialogue with PSE, before this comes to a vote, to ask them questions and to be able to sort of hear certain things from them. I think that should be a part of this before we vote on any final deal. Yeah.
Rob did a great job on the bills. I'll talk about Cuomo,
yeah.
if I may. Take you back down memory lane. We're here talking about bail reform. Who advocated and signed the bail reform law into place? Former Governor Cuomo. Who made $5.2 million on a book deal during the height of the pandemic about his terrific leadership during that pandemic? who, through executive order or executive doctrine, whatever, he sent COVID-positive patients into nursing homes, resulting in thousands and thousands of deaths. So he wants to get back in the race? I say, come on, we'll review your record. Come on in. It's not going to be a pretty sight. And, we have great, not to get partisan, we have great candidates on our side of the aisle. We have a great candidate with Lee Zeldin. And he said the other day, if Cuomo gets in the race, it's going to be great because that'll make me win by an even wider margin. So jump out in the pool, Governor Cuomo. We're waiting for you.
Gas tax situation right now. There's been some, Governor Hochul has said that there is some discussion about some relief on gas prices. What would you prefer? Would you prefer to see gas taxes capped, suspended, or some people talk about like a rebate where people get like a check for a car in their house?
I think you get too cute by half on this. It just doesn't have the effect that we need. I think New Yorkers need immediate relief, which is why the suspension, I think, is what is needed at this moment. You're talking about some of the highest gas prices I've ever seen in my lifetime, 42 years. And you know what? I'm fortunate. I can absorb it. There's a lot of my constituents who cannot. There's a lot of my constituents who this is the difference between paying their electric bill or putting enough gas in their car. And when the comment back is buy an electric car, I've looked at electric cars. You know what they cost? They cost a lot of money. And I think that shows how out of touch some of my colleagues are when it comes to this issue. And I think the other point, Nick, that I would add is that, instead of they're having dialogue, do they do a rebate? Do they do a holiday? There's a bill out there sponsored by Senator Parker that would actually increase the gas tax by 55 cents a gallon. That's still a real bill. That's their solution. Their solution is to make it worse. Or at least one of their solutions is to make it worse. So this should not be real hard, in my view. When you look at what New Yorkers are paying and the impact that's having on people's bottom lines, this is the kitchen table issue of kitchen table issues. People are they are spending more, and there's no sense that it's going to go down anytime soon. So let's stop with do we make a rebate? We could screw up a one-car funeral sometimes here in Albany. Let's just suspend the gas tax, and let's give people relief immediately. Let's not mess around with this. Let's send them a message. We hear what you're saying. We feel your pain on this issue, and we know it's a problem. And if they don't, that's a real missed opportunity because that has to happen, in my view, in the budget because there's obviously a fiscal impact to that.
Great. Okay.
Given the apparent improvement from lieutenant governors, either one, should the SAM money in this year's budget be like it has in the past, or should we be looking at changes?
Well, this is not a new issue down here. I think we're open to anything to keep elected officials honest. You would hope with all the oversight, all the laws we have, that elected officials would be in it, not to help themselves, but to do what's right for the public. So I can't speak for the Senate Republicans, but I could speak for our conference. I think we're open to anything to make sure that it doesn't happen again, but we need to have a full investigation of what happened here with the Lieutenant Governor. I hope that proceeds. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.